Most men today are performing masculinity so well they've forgotten what being a man actually feels like. They wake up, show up, push through, shut down. And somewhere between silence and self-control, something sacred disappears. You see it in his shoulders, in the way he nods when he wants to scream, in the way he says, "I'm good," because breaking down would be too inconvenient. You see it in your own reflection, when you stare at your phone with no one to call, when you walk into a room and feel like an imposter in your own skin, when you build success but still carry shame, like you're wearing a crown that doesn't fit. The world taught you how to achieve, it never taught you how to belong. And now you're wondering why you can't feel anything, why the victories feel hollow, why the silence at night is the loudest thing in your life. But what if it's not failure that brought you here? What if it's a memory not of something you lost, but of something you were born with and forced to forget before the armor, before the pretending, before the grind became your identity? There were 4 pillars inside you, 4 thrones carved into the foundation of your soul. Not ideals, not stereotypes, not strategies. The king, the warrior, the magician, the lover. Each one asleep, each one waiting. And maybe the reason you're here now is because they're waking up. This isn't a motivational video. This is a funeral for the version of you that kept performing, and a resurrection of the one who remembers. You're not here to become a man. You're here to reclaim what was already yours. Because the truth is, the longer you wear the mask, the more your soul starts to suffocate. And the only way back is through. This is your initiation. You don't become a warrior when you fight. You become a warrior the first time you choose not to. It starts with the silence. The kind that comes after someone crosses a line again, and you decide not to explode, not because you're weak, but because you've learned that violence doesn't stop pain. It just passes it along. We've been sold a cheap version of the warrior, anger in motion. Control dressed up as confidence. But real warriors, they don't show up to conquer. They show up to protect. And sometimes the person they're protecting is themselves. Bassem Araman didn't set out to be a peace builder. He was arrested at 17 with grenades in his hands. Hatred gave him purpose. But in prison something cracked. He studied the Holocaust. He wept for people he'd been told to hate. And when his daughter was later killed by soldiers, he didn't seek revenge, he chose reconciliation. Because the bravest thing a man can do isn't fight his enemies. It's heal the part of himself that wants to stay at war. But the warrior isn't always heroic. Sometimes he's the one doing the damage. The tyrant charges into conflict because it feels familiar. He dominates to feel alive. But it's fear in disguise, fear of irrelevance, fear of softness. Fear that if he stops swinging, he'll be exposed as hollow. And then there's the man who gave up completely. The one who avoids conflict so well he avoids his own voice. He becomes invisible, numb, emotionally anesthetized. His silence becomes a slow death. You've seen him. Maybe you've been him. The man who wakes up every morning to a life that doesn't feel like his, but stays silent anyway. That's the paradox. The warrior must be both fire and restraint. He must know how to roar and how to be still, to fight fiercely and to walk away when pride demands a war that wisdom would decline. You see it in the father who shows up to every custody hearing, even when the court keeps saying no. In the veteran who picks up a brush instead of a bottle. In the husband who holds his wife's hand while she crumbles from grief, not because he knows what to say, but because he refuses to let her fall alone. These men don't ask for applause. They're not looking for medals. They're not trying to prove anything. They just carry the line quietly because someone has to. And that's what makes them warriors. Sometimes what's sacred isn't a battlefield, it's a breakfast table, it's a whispered apology. It's not walking away from yourself when the heat comes. The warrior isn't the loudest. He's the one who still shows up when it hurts to care. Every man wants the crown, but few are ready to carry its weight. Because real power isn't about being obeyed, it's about being trusted. And trust doesn't come from dominance, it comes from presence. The world tells men to rule by control, to dominate or disappear. But the deeper truth is this: the king doesn't rule by force, he rules by alignment. By being the calm in the storm, by bringing order to chaos without needing to raise his voice. But to become that kind of king, you first have to let the tyrant die. In ancient Sweden, famine swept the land, crops failed, people starved. The priest said the gods needed blood, and King Domalde, instead of hiding or blaming, offered his life. They laid him on the altar, and when his blood touched the earth, the rains returned. The harvest came back, the people lived. Leadership once meant being the first to bleed, not the last to take. But that kind of sovereignty terrifies the modern world because it doesn't come with applause. It comes with sacrifice. Man steps into his kingship not when he gets everything under control, but when he realizes he no longer needs to be at the center. It's not about ruling over others, it's about ruling within. But the shadow shows up fast. The tyrant king clings to power because he's afraid of being seen. He punishes to avoid vulnerability. He silences others to drown out the chaos in his own mind. And he thinks the crown makes him worthy, but the weight of it only exposes his fear. Then there's the passive king, the one who abdicates. He hides behind indecision. He lets others lead not because he trusts them, but because he doesn't trust himself. Both are missing the point. The crown isn't a symbol of control, it's a reminder of responsibility. To lead with vision, to speak with clarity, to serve without ego. You see it in the man who raises a child that's not his. In the boss who takes the fall so his team keeps their jobs. In the grandfather who's dying but still shows up at the table with a story to remind everyone who they are. A real king doesn't need to be the loudest, he just needs to be there when it matters most. But here's the paradox: the king must be strong enough to serve, but humble enough to surrender. He must have the authority to make decisions, but the wisdom to listen before he does. He must be the backbone of the village, but never forget that the village is what makes him king. And that kind of presence only comes from inner alignment, from knowing that you don't need permission to take up space. You just need to show up in integrity again, again, and again. Because while the warrior defends the border, and the magician deciphers the pattern, and the lover opens the heart, it's the king who decides what kind of world they build together. And maybe that's what the world is missing, not more men trying to be in charge, but more men willing to be responsible for their impact. More men who sit with discomfort instead of avoiding it, who bless instead of belittle, who stay grounded when everything around them shakes. The king doesn't sit on the throne for validation, he sits there so others don't have to carry the burden alone. And when you begin to live like that, when your presence becomes a source of stability, you won't need a crown. Because people will feel it before they see it. And when you're gone, they'll remember not what you said, but how they felt when you were in the room. There's a kind of wisdom that doesn't speak. It watches, it waits. It listens for the silence beneath your thoughts. The magician is not here to entertain. He's not here to explain. He's here to reveal, but only if you're ready to look. You don't find him in titles or theology. You find him at 3 a.m. He's when you're staring at the ceiling, asking a question you can't put into words. He speaks in symbols, not sentences. In dreams, in déjà vu. In that moment you almost broke, but something told you, this means something. He is the part of you that doesn't want answers. He wants truth. And truth doesn't come cheap. In the Norse myth, Odin didn't gain wisdom by reading scrolls. He hung himself from the world tree for 9 nights, alone. Pierced by his own spear. He gave up his eye. Because real vision costs something. It asks what you're willing to sacrifice to see. Albert Hofmann didn't discover the magician in theory. He found him in a lab when he ingested LSD and took a bike ride through the collapse of everything he thought was real. Colors melting, time bending, identity unraveling. And instead of running, he watched. Because what he found was something deeper than control. He found the boundary between reality and the infinite. And he realized the mind isn't a machine, it's a doorway. But with that door comes danger. The magician's shadow is seductive. He can manipulate, speak in riddles to avoid responsibility, hide behind complexity. Use inside as armor instead of medicine. You've seen this man. The one who's always analyzing but never feeling. The one who offers wisdom to everyone else but won't look in the mirror long enough to face his own pain. And that's the paradox. The magician sees everything except what he refuses to feel. He becomes a sorcerer of detachment, offering clarity with no compassion, solutions with no soul. But the integrated magician, he doesn't need to be seen. He just needs to understand. Not to control the world, but to interpret it in a way that heals instead of harms. He sits with discomfort until the pattern reveals itself. He learns to live with uncertainty. He asks better questions instead of chasing faster answers. You don't need a robe or a ritual to awaken him. You just need to be willing to feel what you've been avoiding. To write down the dreams you think don't matter. To sit in silence long enough to hear your own mind echo. Because sometimes transformation doesn't come through force, it comes through surrender. Through knowing that the unknown isn't your enemy, it's your teacher. And the moment you stop demanding control, you begin to understand things that can't be taught. The magician doesn't need certainty, he needs space. And when you give it to him, he gives you back the most dangerous thing in the world, a new way of seeing. There is a silence more painful than rage. The silence that follows a goodbye you weren't ready for. The silence of lying in bed next to someone who no longer reaches for you. The silence after I'm fine when you're anything but. This is where the lover lives, not in poetry, not in romance, but in the ache, in the moments that break you open and refuse to let you close again. The lover isn't just about desire, he's about devotion, about the courage it takes to feel without flinching, to stay soft in a world that rewards numbing out. But most men weren't taught to feel. They were taught to perform, to keep it together, to hold back the flood, to be admired but never known. And so the lover gets buried, under muscle, under sarcasm, under silence. Until one day something cracks. Maybe it's her leaving. Maybe it's your child looking at you with fear instead of trust. Maybe it's watching a sunset and feeling absolutely nothing. That's when the lover starts whispering again, not in words, but in longing. In the Persian legend, Majnun wandered the desert, whispering the name of his beloved Layla until he was called mad. But the mystics knew better. They knew this wasn't madness. It was devotion beyond the ego. A love that emptied him of everything false until only the sacred remained. That's the lover's gift. He dissolves what doesn't matter and leaves only what does. But the lover has shadows too. When he is wounded, he clings, he overgives. He loses himself trying to be enough for people who were never capable of receiving him. He mistakes chaos for connection, intensity for intimacy. Or he shuts down, numb, unavailable, kind but never present, safe but never open. A ghost in his own relationships. That's the paradox. The lover aches to merge, but must learn how to stay whole. To hold his desire without becoming it. To feel fully without needing to be saved. To love without disappearing. You see him in the father who holds his sleeping daughter with the same hands that once punched walls. In the man who writes letters he never sends because the act of writing brings him closer to himself. In the one who says, I love you first, not to win, but because it's the truth. Feeling is his revolution. Connection is his war cry, and that is his power. He walks back into the heart long after others have abandoned it, not because it's safe, but because it's sacred. The lover doesn't teach you how to avoid heartbreak. He teaches you how to survive it, and then how to love again, more open, more honest, more alive. Because in the end, the deepest strength isn't found in what you protect. It's found in what you're willing to lose and still choose to love anyway. The man who walks into the world now is not the man who began this journey. He doesn't need to prove himself anymore, because he remembers who he is, not as a role, not as a reaction, but as a presence. You can feel it when he enters the room. Not because he takes up space, but because he doesn't need to. He carries no mask, no armor, no script, because he has reclaimed every part of himself. The king who no longer rules from fear, but blesses from stillness. The warrior who knows when to fight and when to lay down his sword. The magician who no longer hides in intellect, but guides with insight. The lover who feels without drowning, who opens without disappearing. This is not four men, this is one man whole. But he didn't get here by climbing. He got here by shedding, by grieving what he outgrew, by dying to the image he was told to maintain. The boy who wanted to be good, the teen who wanted to be tough, the man who wanted to be admired. He left them behind, not in shame, but in gratitude, because each one protected him. But now he doesn't need protecting, he needs truth. That's what this journey has always been about, not transformation, remembrance. And now he remembers. Not just who he is, but what he's here to do. To be a presence that stabilizes, a fire that warms, a heart that feels, a mind that sees. A man whose life becomes a temple built on four pillars. King, warrior, magician, lover. Together they don't make him perfect, they make him integrated, they make him real. And this is what the world needs now. Not more men performing masculinity, but more men remembering their sacred design. If something in you stirred, don't run from it. Let it rise, let it breathe. Let it move through your life like a returning tide. You're not broken. You are just beginning to remember. And if these words felt like something ancient waking up in your chest, say so, say it out loud. Say it in the comments. Say it to the friend who needs this but would never search for it. Say it to the mirror. And if you're still wondering whether these four archetypes live in you, you've already answered the question by staying until the end. The king doesn't retire, he becomes the land. The warrior doesn't rest, he becomes the boundary. The magician doesn't disappear, he becomes the question that keeps you awake. And the lover, he becomes the breath that reminds you that you're still here. This is what the journey gives you, not a crown, not a sword, not a spell book, not a love story, but a mirror. And in that mirror, you see what was always there. Not a role to play, but a pattern to embody. The king, warrior, magician, lover. Not four masks, four modes of remembering. Four sacred functions that every real man must resurrect, not to become someone else, but to finally come home to himself. And they live in you, not as costumes, but as instincts. As voices, as choices you've already made in the quiet moments no one noticed, but you remember. They showed up when you stood your ground without raising your voice. When you held someone through their tears instead of fixing them. When you stayed with your pain until it revealed a truth you weren't ready for. When you whispered "I love you" and meant it without needing it returned. You don't need permission to awaken them. You only need to stop pretending you don't hear them. They're not waiting for you to be perfect. They're waiting for you to be present. To remember that masculinity isn't a performance. It's a practice, not dominance, but integration, not pressure, but presence. And every time you embody them, even just a little, you make it safer for another man to do the same. That is the legacy, not dominance passed down, but dignity restored. This isn't the end, this is the circle closing and beginning again. You've walked through the 4 gates. You've sat with the silence, the fury, the mystery, the ache. You've remembered what the world asked you to forget. And now the question isn't what's next. The question is, who do you bring back into your life as you are now? Because you are not the same man who pressed play. And the version of you that walked through this, he deserves a life that reflects what he's reclaimed. So ask yourself, where can I bless instead of command? Where can I protect without controlling? Where can I see without needing to explain? Where can I love without losing myself? And ask the men around you, your brothers, your sons, your friends, to walk this path too. Not with pressure, not with preaching, but with presence. Send this to them, sit with them. Say the thing you've been holding in your chest for 10 years. Because what we reclaim in ourselves, we make possible in others. And if this meant something to you, if something in you cracked, or healed, or burned, then don't let this be where the story ends. Say something in the comments. Name the part of you that woke up, and pass it on to the man who's ready, but doesn't know where to start. Because king, warrior, magician, lover isn't just a title, it's a memory. And memory, when spoken aloud, becomes legacy. Let that legacy begin now.